Welcome to Human Powered, the podcast about creating a high-performing agency or consultancy business. I'm Trenton Moss, and today I have Victoria Usher, CEO and founder of the B2B tech PR consultancy Gingermay. Victoria, hello.
Great to be here, Trenton.
Victoria, you've been running your multi-award-winning global consultancy for the past 16 years. Tell me a bit about how you define high-performing within Gingermay.
As a people-focused business, this is really at the core of what we do, because as with many agencies and many of your listeners, they are focused on how they can motivate their teams, how they can keep their teams performing at their best. How do we define it? What we're really looking at is satisfied team members, satisfied and retained clients. And that broadly, when that's balanced really well, then that is success to us.
So let's pick up on that thing you were saying about satisfied and retained clients. What is it that the highest performers in the business do to make sure that you always have that?
Client retention is the thing that agencies really want to have. So we've got clients we've had for 12, 14 years. We'll have monthly or 6 weekly calls, just one senior team member with that client. So you've got an account team of maybe 3 or 4 people that is speaking weekly to the client. They're meeting them face to face, but then we'll have an off cycle call. And I do those calls as well with the client, just checking in. When I talk to them, I'm helping them brainstorm, talking around that, giving them ideas. That is that kind of added value. And when I first came into the industry, a clever consultant said to me, don't negotiate on price, but give free consultancy time as a negotiation point, which I really liked because people do really value it. That is the most valuable thing you can give them, is that senior level consultancy. They can really see the value in it. So not only does it allow you to get to know your client really well, you get to understand the dynamics and also what is going on behind the scenes, which they won't be telling you week in, week out, unless you're seeing them quite regularly, face to face, in depth, etc. It feels like a very personal relationship when you do that. Almost, I want to say intimate. It is quite intimate in that it's just one-on-one on a call or face to face every 6 weeks, because they're telling you everything that's actually happening. And that does really secure and cement that relationship and help a great deal. You also get inklings if there's any issues at all. And in our experience, issues will start small. It might be that you're doing a report and it doesn't quite meet the mark. Maybe senior management is saying something. Sometimes clients won't tell you directly. They don't just say to you, actually, we don't like this. They'll drop hints quite a lot of the time. We'll talk around it, but they won't necessarily come in and tell you. So actually, when you're having that one-to-one dynamic, they can say, oh, this is the feedback I'm getting. I'm not really sure what to do about it, because they sometimes themselves don't know. So you can just go in and just put those tiny little sparks of fire out really early by just saying, oh God, that's absolutely no problem. We can potentially do it this way, and help to overcome it and win that trust. So that is something that we do that has really helped us with client retention for years and years. And like I say, it's quite a big investment. So there's 4 of us that do it in the agency, and we split our client list across the 4 of us. So it's not too heavyweight, but it massively helps.
Now, one thing I know about the business is that you have 7 competencies. Can you tell me a bit more about what these are and why you have them?
Yes. So this is a really nice benchmark and measurement. So it started evolving when we had maybe 12 graduates a year, and it really helped for us to be able to manage them. And what it gave us was a framework where they could see where their expertise was required and where they were needed. So it helps team members to see where they're performing well, which areas they're excelling in, and where they also have developmental areas. What we're actually doing is getting them to self-score. This is really critical, because you often will get a much better, more honest response from a team member if they are self-scoring. And it's much easier to then have that open and dynamic conversation. So it's a very transparent reporting tool that we can utilize. And it's a very simple scoring mechanism. It's 3 to 1. So the highest you can get is a 3, the lowest you can get is a 1. You should be aiming to score all 2s. And when you get promoted, you should be scoring all 1s across the board, because you've gone into a next level. So you're starting afresh. If you've been promoted and you were going straight into having all scores of 2s, it means that we've sat you at that level for too long. So that would be our bad. It's like a mapping system where people can map their strengths and weaknesses. It's like a heat map. And we can say you're excellent in here. And we can see this with the type of feedback you're getting. But this is an area where we really need you to lean into. And we'll often set them tasks throughout the quarter to get busy with, really to improve their scores. And we're doing that quarterly. And we do it with everybody across the whole organisation, from the most senior to the most junior. We've got lots of really good examples of where this has worked very well. We've had some team members that were maybe not as confident and they needed a little bit more lean in and some coaching. We have a really strong coaching program and philosophy that runs throughout the business. We've got a coach that comes in, works with team members. And for example, we've had some more of the junior team members that just weren't confident at all about their presentation skills and about holding their own on a call with a client. So what we've done is we've taken that and we've said, right, we're going to give you some separate coaching on this. We've actually sent them to acting lessons. So we set them up with some coaching with a professional actor who talked them through how you put on almost like a professional mask and how your body language makes a real difference. And then we've also had loads of internal one-to-one training with our ops director, who is actually a coach as well himself. And he has taken them through doing things, for example, like filming them and then going through with them to evaluate their performance afterwards, and then repeating that process over a number of months so that they then get better and better, getting them to self-evaluate, recording their performance again on team calls or client calls so they can come back off that and actually see how they've performed. And then you can see them increase in that area. So as some people, they just often will just have one little nagging area, and it may get to the point where we think, actually, they're never going to get realistically any better in this, but they've improved so much on the other areas. We need to bump them up, and we just know that this is always going to be an area of slight weakness. In other areas, if it's so important like journalist relations, which is core to the job, then that would have to be improved before we'd bump them up, and we would therefore work on a program with them. Yeah, we will do bespoke training. Something we've actually done recently, which has just been, I find it just phenomenal, is we've been using, there's a woman called Vanessa Van Edwards, and she did 2 or 3 sessions that were about 2.5 hours long about non-verbal communications. And it's all about speaking with your hands, for example, open hands, and why it's so important and why it's so powerful. So, for example, they analysed all the TED Talks that had ever happened, and the top 10 TED Talks had something like 100% more hands being shown, open hands. And that was the only differentiator, because you can see that with non-verbal skills like that, it just feels much more powerful and you just gain much more trust. And the reason is because if you sit on your hands, you're seen as less trustworthy, because I could have a sword in my hand or a knife to actually stab you, because inherently we're all cavemen. Right. So, we are not that developed, actually. So we are all looking for these tiny micro expressions. So we've done training, even with things like that, set people a task to watch those podcasts, because they're quite good fun. We set them in work time and say, right, watch the podcast, and then we're all going to have a discussion. So even things like that, making them a little bit fun and using current materials that are coming out on things like that to actually train people that we know will really help them in their performance and make them much, much more high performing, and understand why maybe they're not getting the reaction that they're getting from other people because of these micro expressions. Resting bitch face being another. So, always come onto a call, be aware of your face, don't have your resting bitch face on, be looking in the camera, don't be looking down at your phone. And I'm deliberately muffling my voice now, because actually it's a really bad first impression for somebody else that will take 6 months to overcome and rebuild.
And when you do these training interventions and this coaching, what impact do you see on your client relationships?
What we tend to get is improved scores and improved NPS scores. So the last client survey we did had our highest NPS scores that we've ever had. And we can see that a lot of the feedback we're getting on the team members is then translating through to high performance and therefore with satisfaction. So we will be looking at all of these things together. Also for them themselves, we can see that they're just enjoying themselves more. And that's really important, because if you're not having a good time, if you feel uncomfortable, that comes across in your nonverbal body language. You can see it. You can see when somebody is just awkward. You can see their shoulders are up to their ears. They don't like it. They're hesitating. They're rushing. And those are all symptomatic of somebody that's nervous and maybe hasn't prepared. So the client feels, again, more relaxed. They feel that they've got the team they should be having, and therefore the feedback that we're getting all builds into that. So, I'm not saying it's 1 + 1 = 2, as you will know, Trenton, because you have run agencies and sold them in the past. This is incredibly nuanced. So the way we are approaching it is just by doing as much as we can across as many areas as we can, and then watching the overall line on the chart, essentially looking to see if it's going up. And then if it doesn't, we will push in another lever to see if that is working. Because everybody is so different, introverted characteristics, extroverted characteristics, and introverted, extroverted clients as well, it's making sure that you are matching, this is something else we do a lot of, matching team members up to the characteristics of clients. And all in all, you're hoping that entire picture works in a very efficient, high-performing way.
You talked there at the end about matching team members to clients. And I believe one of the ways that you do this is using DISC. Can you just start by telling us, what is DISC?
There's a chance I might get too overexcited at this point because I'm so passionate about DISC. A light bulb went on in my head as soon as I saw it, and I was like, where has this been all my life? This is unbelievable. So for anybody that hasn't come across it, you need to buy the book Surrounded by Idiots, because that explains it on a conceptual level. If you are MD running a business, you really do need to start investing in this within your business. Essentially, it's like it's a psychometric test on speed. It's absolutely phenomenal. And what it does is it allows you to map at any point where your team sits in terms of their characteristics. And it's essentially like a clock face split into 4 areas, which is 4 colours. So red is dominant, yellow is very outgoing, extrovert. Both red and yellow are extrovert. And then you have green, which are people that are more caring, people focused. And then your high blues. So greens and blues, again, introverted. Your high blues are your accountants, your city folks. So you tend to get CEOs will have to have red in them. So they tend to be either red yellow, that's your extroverted CEOs, or your red blues, who are introverted. Maybe they are more technical kind of people, or financially leaning type CEOs versus the sales leaning CEOs. And ideally, you've got all 3. So I've got all 3 really high in my color profile, which you would expect. So typically, once you've done these tests enough, you meet somebody and you know exactly where they sit. So I can meet somebody and pretty quickly I know where they're going to sit within that wheel. And the way that we use it internally is everybody has their DISC profile when they're going through interview, so we can see how they're going to complement the team. And then post-interview, they then have coaching on that, and then they get to see what everybody else's colours are. So they know essentially where they're sitting in relation to them. And the most helpful part that I found is that it gives you a language that you need to talk to all of those different colours. So you're not talking with different mechanisms and different words that are going to demotivate. So for example, my opposite colour essentially is a green, which is the more caring type, because you'll be the same. You'll be faster, to the point. I need a quick answer. I need you to give me a quick summary. When I'm dealing with a high green characteristic or client, I have to go in much more gently and slower. And that's the key thing. I'm 100 miles an hour, speak at 100 miles an hour, think 100 miles an hour. I'm always thinking about a minute ahead of where I'm actually sitting. And it's not helpful. And for other people, I mean, I love it. I'm kind of almost on, wired on my own adrenaline. It's very overwhelming for a green person if I'm behaving like that. So I know immediately when I see somebody that has those characteristics of a green, I need to be going in with, how are you? How is work? How is everything doing for you? And you just do that nice, gentle introduction, and then you can get them on board. So the benefit of working with greens, for example, highly considered. They'll think of all the problems in a situation, whereas I'll barge in as a red, get highly excited, have the plan in my head, it's succeeded already. And the green will say, well, hang on a minute, Victoria, hang on a minute, stop running off. Let's just come back to the real world and let's see what the things are that you haven't thought about. And then I'm like, damn it, they're right. So the point about the DISC is that you need to have a full team. So it could be a full netball, hockey, football, however, whichever your favorite team is. You need to have the goal shooters, the goalkeepers, and the midfielders, because you need all of those characteristics within a business. We don't not like any color, but some colors are better suited to certain roles. So if we had a finance director who was high yellow, i.e. highly outgoing, they would be in probably in the wrong job. Actually, our finance director is a blue, and she is absolutely perfectly suited. She's like she's like a dog with a bone, chasing invoices, detail, nails us down. She's chasing me for receipts 3 days later and will not give up. And that is perfect for a finance person. If you've got somebody that's account managing, they have to have a good element of yellow in them, because the yellow is the outgoing characteristic. They enjoy people. They want to speak to people. They enjoy working with people. Because it's a very people-focused job, PR, they should have that high yellow. If they don't have the high yellow, they may not be in the right role. So they may be better suited as a copywriter, for example, or somebody that's more analytical, or somebody that's working behind the scenes, because they work better independently and not within a team and not without people. So they don't get their energy through people. So that's why it's so helpful, because you can map the whole team. And then when you're speaking to a client, the speed is one indicator that I've already mentioned. So people that are high red tend to be, right, let's get through this agenda. Let's right, what's going on next? Where is that going? What's the timeline? Where is it? Has it been done already? That's a high red. And a high yellow is, right, oh my goodness, it's amazing. This is so exciting. Yeah, really like having a chat with you. Absolutely. This is going to be the best thing we're doing. We're so excited about our goals for next year. It's going to be absolutely dynamic. So that's your yellows, and your greens will be sitting there quietly, and so will your blues. And they'll wait to speak. And that's the point. You need to all be quiet, and then they will speak out. So they tend to be the ones left behind in the conversation, unless you make sure you're inviting them forwards. So just based on some of those main characteristics, you can tell immediately who your team members are going to get on with, because matching like for like. And I don't think we've ever been wrong. We've had a couple of cases where we've had high red marketing directors, and we've actually put somebody green on because they've got the relevant experience. And we've said this could be a bit of a clash. And you know what? 9 times out of 10, it is. And so you've got to trust your instinct. So what we will then do in those instances, and put somebody on the team with a high red as well, so that we've got high red in our team with maybe somebody with the expertise to match that client's high red, because they will really thrive and be driven by that speed and that need to get things done correctly, whilst the green person is coming in with the expertise, and they will go away and think about it. So it's a really excellent way of gaining success, and just not shooting yourself in the foot by putting people together that aren't well suited. And I would also add, one of our directors, she rates on the introverted scale, and what she will say, because she needs to listen quite hard in a conversation, whereas you and I are all nods. I mean, I'm talking to you now, I can see you nodding at me. I'm nodding and using my hands. Typical extroverted characteristics. Yeah. So I'm listening to you, you're listening to me, you're telling me with your gestures that I'm listening to you. She can't do that because she's processing. So what she does is typically sits very quietly and is listening and taking notes. But what she does, she will say to clients, now I'm listening to you, but I'm not going to be moving my head or my hands very much, because I'm really concentrating. So don't think the screen has frozen. Don't think I'm getting bored or I haven't listened. It's because I'm concentrating and thinking of questions to ask you. And you can see that client go, great. And then the conversation then progresses really, really well. So if you're more introverted, those kinds of helpful pointers for clients can really help put them at ease, because maybe your body language is not, again, your non-verbal cues are not what they would expect them to be. So that's somebody who is learning. So she is green yellow, and she is learning brilliantly how to talk to somebody who is a high red yellow and adapt to their needs when they're actually talking on a call.
It sounds like DISC almost underpins so much decision making in the business.
It really does. Yes, we have conversations about DISC every day. So it's absolutely bloody fantastic for partnering up. So putting teams together. So you don't want necessarily 2 people of the same color partnered. From our side, you're definitely looking to see what the partnership is like with the client and making an assessment of them. So that's where it works on with the client element of it. It really helps when you're recruiting, which I've already talked about before, because you can see what characteristics somebody's going to have, and therefore you can see who they're going to work well with. So we know we're filtering people out in the process before we even get to DISC. But once we get to DISC, in that interview process, it just helps to fill in a lot of those gaps, which is really super. Where it really, really comes into its own internally to create the high performance element is it turns subjective discussions into data-driven, objective ones. And that is an absolute game changer for a manager, because it suddenly becomes unemotional, and it is, people can understand and they can have that conversation go away knowing that you're not being personal and you're not just having a pop at someone because maybe you don't like them. So it stops all these "my manager doesn't like me" type conversations, which has been around for millennia. They don't like me, they don't like my skills, because they're like this, I'm more introverted, they don't like that, blah, blah, blah. You don't have those conversations anymore, because everybody knows everybody else's disc profile. What you can then have is a conversation about how their disc color responds in a certain situation. So it becomes almost objective and almost third person when you're talking about it. So if you have somebody that is dealing with a very high red CEO or a CMO, high reds are very challenging to deal with because, as I said, they're fast, they're incredibly direct, and that often is the biggest challenge that people find, because they want answers quickly and they're asking you a direct question. There's none of the kind of, let's think about feelings here. They just want the answers. Doesn't mean they're not feeling. It just means that what they're prioritizing is getting shit done over top of feelings. So the feelings will come later. So when you're dealing with a situation like that, if we were to put somebody into a situation that's maybe green yellow, they're feeling people, they're sociable people, they're not as fast as the high reds, and they aren't as direct. What we can do is we can have that discussion with them and say, look, you now have a CMO or a CEO on your account. You are going to really have to channel your red. In this situation, you said X, but what the client probably needed to hear was more Y. So why don't we have a think about how you could have dealt with that situation, or how you deal with it again next time, knowing the client has high expectations, is very fast, is very demanding, is going to be very direct. How would you deal with that? And a typical conclusion from that conversation might be, I need to have all the potential questions laid out already and have prepared for them. So that means I need to do an internal brainstorm. I need to have sent them pre-reads. I need to have spoken to the internal team to find out if there's any questions that the CMO or the CEO has got, so I can pre-prepare for that, so that when we get to the point, I can then answer them as efficiently as possible. And also, I'm not going to waffle, because that's what high reds hate. So I'm going to give them a very concise answer and then wait for them to ask for more information. And then you'd be like, amazing, you've got it. So that's a typical kind of coaching conversation using DISC, helping somebody to deal with other types of personalities that are not like themselves.
And as well as learning how to adapt your communications to different personality types, I would imagine everyone in your team is also learning loads about themselves in the process.
100%. They're learning loads. And what was really tricky for us, we first did DISC, I think about 5 years ago. When it was mapped out, there were 4 or 5 people that were clearly in the wrong job. And what was interesting for us as a management team was they were all the people that were the more difficult ones to manage. They were just not comfortable. And you will know what I mean as an agency owner, who's managed people. They're the ones that are pointing the finger at you saying, you're not managing me properly. This isn't right. This isn't correct. And actually, when you look at the DISC profile, you're like, this is why, because you are uncomfortable. You're not naturally using your skill set, because the job is asking you to use a skill set that you are lower scoring in. So therefore, you're going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to feel like you're not being as valued as much, because you have your own self-value, but you're perhaps not seeing that from your peers or your clients. And the reason for that is because it could be, we had somebody who was very low yellow, who was in a client-facing role, always found that role difficult, but would really heavily index in on one area out of the 7 and say, but I'm doing really well because I'm excellent at this. And we would be saying, you need to be excellent at everything, because you need to be an all-rounder to be in this job. You can't just do this job doing this one thing. You need to be doing all 7. And them having seen the DISC profile, they could see with their own eyes. Like, we didn't have to say anything. That's the beauty of it. We didn't have to turn around and say, if you look, you don't naturally have those skills. And they could see their yellow was really low. And I mean like 6%. Whereas one of my colleagues is 96% yellow, and they never stop talking. So that's their issue, is they are so high yellow, you can't get them to stop and listen. So that's another style of coaching that we have to do with them, which is ask a question, stop talking. And my advice is always just be gentler when you come in. So I know what all my downsides are. I think I'm more self-aware than I used to be. I couldn't understand why people found me overwhelming. And now I know, because I've seen myself on a DISC profile. I'm like, all right, yeah, that type of a person is going to find me way too much. I'm straight in. There's no niceties. I'm direct. And a lot of people find that difficult to deal with. But CMOs, that high read, love it because it's talking the same language.
Let's look to the future. Tell me a bit more about what's next for the business and what's next for you.
I think what's going to be interesting for us as a business, and I know everybody is struggling with this at the moment, and is AI. We just don't know how that's going to impact our business. And you have to be flexible, you have to be nimble, you have to be adaptable. And I have to be a technical expert. So, it's that whole point about you're not just a leader, you have to be an expert in so many different areas. So this is my new hat, which is my AI hat, figuring out where it's going, how it can benefit our business, because it will, but how it's going to affect it as well, how clients are looking at it. So I think watch this space. We are looking to expand. We are looking to grow. We've got a great management team, and AI is the big question.
And we've been speaking for a while and we haven't actually mentioned the 2 letters AI. So I'm glad we got that in there at the end.
I just managed to squeeze it in.
Victoria, thank you so much for taking the time out to join today. It's been so wonderful speaking to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Trenton.
You've been listening to Human Powered, the podcast all about creating a high-performing agency or consultancy business. Thanks for tuning in.